Welcome back, everybody. This is a Triple B podcast with your host, Seth Todd and
Allman Biggs.
Yeah, everybody, we got a little different change of pace this week. We're sitting down with Caleb Meyer. He's a repeat guest, and another one of the guys on our team, Dillan Berryman, my personal coach. And we're just going to sit down, chat about training here a little bit. And I just recently competed in a meet this weekend, so we'll do a little bit of meet recap with that, and we'll just talk a little bit about training styles and how people get better with different training styles and what we think works the best. So I guess we'll start it off. I competed in the Blue Mountain Collegiate Cup this weekend. It was a pretty good meet. Started off, I hadn't competed since February, so it's been quite a while. Had to get another qualifying total for nationals, but first meet coming off the injury, so I'd say it went pretty well. I went 8 for 9. Ended up getting a 22-pound squat PR up to 540, and then I got my first bench at 303 and a second bench at 314, which was 4 pounds shy of my meet PR. Went for 336, I believe, and got about halfway up, and I lost tightness in my lat, and I missed it. It just wasn't there. And then deadlifts went pretty well. I'd been training hook this last month or so, and I hadn't had any problems with it. Work up to 545 hook in training, and got to the meet, pulled my opener 515 hook, and the bar was a little bit fatter, and it almost felt like I couldn't get it up, so I just threw hook out the window and went back to mixed grip because mixed has never failed me. So pulled 515 for an opener, went 545, I think, and then 567 for my third, which is a 5-pound meet PR. So
solid.
Pretty good day.
Yeah. Let's blame it on the bar. Let's blame the hook grip on the bar. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's the bar they used in our September meet, and it was it. You wouldn't think that it would be much thicker than like an Ohio Power bar, but it definitely is.
Yeah.
Was it a 29.5 millimeter?
I don't know. I didn't measure it, man.
It felt a little different. They didn't give me enough time to pull out my tape measure.
Of course, yeah. I don't know what bar it was. I just remember that bar being super stiff. It messed me up on deadlift a little bit.
Oh yeah, it didn't have any bend at anything.
No.
But yeah, it was a solid meet yesterday. We enjoyed it, and Seth did awesome. I was excited to see, and you had a lot more on squat. You had a ton more. I'm excited to see what you put up in nationals.
Yeah, that third squat, I got ready, and at the last second they changed the order, and another guy went out before me, and I had my knee wraps on and everything, and I'm walking up to the bar, and they're like, no, and I'd seen the bar wasn't at my height, so I got really pissed. So I had to sit there with my knee wraps on, and Dylan offered to take them off, but in training I had gotten pretty used to having them on for a minute or so it didn't really bother me. But it was my third squat, so I'd already gotten amped up and hit my ammonia, but it still flew pretty well.
Yeah, definitely good meet for you. Well, what are you looking to hit at nationals?
The goal is we got 6 months till then, and I mean it's out there, but I'd say 600 squat, 400 bench, and a 600 deadlift or more. Nice little 1,600 total. I'm getting that SK before night, so that should help my bench a little bit if I can figure that out how to use that.
Or you just need to get more muscle.
that's kind of the goal for these next 6 months.
It's already too close to weight as it is.
An extra half a pound won't hurt.
The thing about curls is I used to love to do curls, and then after solid powerlifting training, Dylan puts in the program on my 4th day, curls are optional at the end, and I go to hit a single set last week, and I do them, and I'm like, I don't even want to do curls anymore. This is not even the same. He's done brainwashed me. I'm a true powerlifter now.
Don't y'all find that though? The arms are kind of boring now.
Yes, I hate doing arms.
Coach.
I hate doing arms. I do them because they're written down on my program. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all like to do cheat curls instead. Let's load some 45s on the bar and do some big old cheat curls. Like let's do a 5x3 on those.
Yeah,
5x3 curls.
By the end of
5x3 at RP8.
By the end of my life. By the end of my life, all of my lifters just hate curls. I will die happy.
Wow.
Well, you've got 4 that hate them so far, so it's like you're doing good.
You're on the way.
I don't know. Dylan, I'm thinking about going bodybuilding next.
Oh no.
Means you actually have to eat right, though.
I'd love to see Seth on a body.
You mean 3 chicken sandwiches for dinner or not eating right?
Maybe if you want to be a 120 plus.
No, not anytime soon.
Join me, Seth.
Yeah, if you want to be competing with Caleb.
That's not possible.
I'd love to see Seth up on a bodybuilding stage with his mullet.
Oh,
that'd be
man.
epic.
That'd be
Say
crazy.
goodbye to the mullet in January.
Because you got a job coming up, right?
Yeah, I'm starting a little co-op, so the job and the beard the mullet and the beard are going by.
Yep, the job and the beard's going, but the mullet's staying.
The mullet is forever. Billy Ray Cyrus.
That's awesome. All right. So, like I talked to Dylan yesterday about this, and I'm curious to see what Caleb's opinion is, what Seth's opinion is. Okay, so we see a lot of guys nowadays. They post a lot of PRs, and yeah, they're posting their best lifts. They're not really posting. Most of them aren't posting like their bad days. But you see a lot of these guys now. They get strong really fast, and they might not have like. Do you think that's a concerning thing? Like, are they not building up their base enough, or is it just that coaching's gotten better and programming's gotten better? What are y'all's opinions on that?
I mean, I'll go first. I think it's a combination of both. I think every generation of lifters learn a little bit more than the generation before, because the generation before was teaching them and telling them things that didn't work for them. So there's a little bit of that quicker learning curve, but I think most of these people that are posting these big lifts all the time, that's the majority of their training. So I think that's probably going to have, in my opinion, it's going to be a detriment to the longevity of their powerlifting career. Because I forget who said it, but someone said you only have so many 1 rep maxes in your lifetime.
Ed Cohen.
Yeah,
Ed
there
Cohen,
we go.
The GOAT.
But what do you guys think?
I agree 100% with what you're saying. Coaching has gotten better, but like you said, there's only so much that your body can tolerate, especially if you want to make a career out of it. We're all very, very young, and if we continue to beat ourselves up just to get that next PR constantly without having an intelligent way to go about it, then we're not going to last very long. And you see a lot of guys that start out young, really strong, and then all of a sudden they drop off the face of the planet and you never hear about them again because they got injured. I think it's important to build up a base of like good solid technique and a muscle foundation in areas that might not be hit as much in the power lift as you go up, and not try to focus on just hitting that 1 rep max all the time. There's a time and place for everything, and you want to make sure you're ready for you put everything together on that meet day and not worry about just hitting a new PR every single week. Think about it as a long-term kind of thing.
So you want to prepare for the competition. You don't want the competition to be in practice.
Correct.
I agree.
Dylan?
That's something I actually was kind of thinking about earlier. After me and you talked about it the other day, one person that you had brought up that comes to mind is like as far as a coach goes, is Joey Flex, and he has a lot of his athletes doing like the top heavy singles and top heavy sets. And I just kind of got to thinking about how much, even social media has influenced coaches, like arguably very good coaches, because, honestly, like your 3x5 is what's going to be your best, not that rep range necessarily, but this very moderate intensity, moderate volume work is probably what's going to be better for you long term. But man, that just makes a really bad Instagram post. And, with online coaching, it's definitely, I think it's influenced how coaching is done now to an extent, because it's for a coach, it's the constant feed of your athletes when they're hitting PRs and training all the time, and they're hitting these top sets that are just massive, and it gives you more free advertisement almost,
Yeah, it's marketing,
and it is.
Joey Flex is one of the best Instagram coaches, because you see every time you see a Joey Flex athlete post, they're hitting some kind of crazy single all the time. Is that the best for immediate strength? Maybe, but is that sustainable for a long period of time? I don't know. I mean, we'll just have to see as time tells. But,
he's the only athlete I know of off the top of my head that has been long term for him that's made a lot of progress is Jonathan Keiko. Because if I recall, Russell's a pretty new athlete with Joey. 2 years is relatively new, in my opinion, for an athlete and a coach to be working together. But like Keiko's been working with Joey for like 6 years, and he does have a track record, it seems like, of developing long term. But you see a lot of other coaches who do that, and like Caleb was saying, then all of a sudden their lifters just disappear for the better part of a year and a half because they went to go pull their 95% for a triple in training and blew their back out or something.
Yeah. And you see it now, like let's say if you have a month and you say, okay, I have to get this strong at this lift, then yes, I'm probably going to do that lift almost every day because I have to get that strong for that lift. Let's say I have a 400-pound bench and I'm at 300 pounds. I'm like, okay, I need to train this lift pretty maximally every single day for the next 3 weeks to get to where I need to be. And that's where I see like a lot of this programming come from, like that Bulgarian type method of training, of hitting very maximal lifts almost every single day. And that's that's not sustainable over the long term. You can only do that for so long until you need that deload or that motor pattern just gets worn out, or because your joints get worn out. I do think it is good every couple of weeks to change up your lifts. Maybe not like every 3 or 4 weeks, but maybe every 6 to 12 weeks, mainly because just to give that your joints a break from that angle that they're being worked.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you think that the RPE style of training that Joey Flex has made, not popular, not necessarily him made popular, but that style of training has caused for those kinds of things? Because I just watching on the internet, you tend to see a lot of athletes overshoot RPEs just to hit Instagram popular numbers, and say, oh, this is an RPE 8 when it looks like their eyes about to pop out of their head. Do you think RP style of training, just comparatively to percentage-based training, is that's why the emphasis is focused towards kind of that, overshooting? I don't know how to explain it, if that makes any sense.
I think so. I think it's definitely, like Dillan said, I think it's a marketing thing, and I think you can definitely, because everybody wants to be looked at as like a good lifter, and it's definitely that Instagram nowadays. You want to. Because in order to get followers, you need to post. You need to post big things that nobody really does. You need to be unique. You need to be different. So I think that's definitely, absolutely.
I think it also depends on how the athlete is willing to rate the RPE. If they're okay with overshooting for Instagram, then go for it. That's your body. But I prefer to always be on the undershooting side. And not like if I have a single at 8 that day, make it a 6, if I have a single at 8, I'm okay with pulling a 7.5 and not going above 8, because for me personally, the more that you undershoot and the more reps, solid reps you can get in to build confidence, that's going to go further in your career instead of continuing to overshoot.
I think so. And less wear and tear.
It makes sense. You go first.
I've got a pretty interesting take on that. One thing that kind of gets thrown around with RPE, and kind of like how Seth was saying, it kind of depends on the lifter on what they're willing to take on the RPE. But I think a lot of that falls back on what the coach is willing to put up with out of the lifter as well, and the perception of what RPE is. The reactive training manual where RPE was introduced by Mike Tertier, I don't know how to say his name, Mike T. He's spoken a lot about how RPE is, yes, it does have some with how the bar feels, but it's good to have a really large dose of objectivity to that. And I think that, if you do have a coach who's a little bit more willing to let you redline it, you may hit this lift and genuinely think it's an RPE 8 just because you haven't really been forced to have that objectivity about it. Your coach hasn't looked at you and went, hey, that was not an RPE 8. I'm sorry. I don't care what you say. That you literally, there's no way in the world you could have gotten a single other rep with that. Because some lifters are slower than others, some lifters are faster, but like Caleb was saying, just hitting that, going over that RPE a little bit to hit that next Instagram lift, and some coaches are okay with that. But I think it builds a bad argument for RPE, because people say that they're utilizing it, but they're not really utilizing it how it was meant to be programmed.
Yeah. And if you see like a lot of the lifts like Caleb, Dillan, Seth, Zach, Austin Perkins, I mean, yeah, they hit PRs, like rep PRs, but they're not posting these max effort lifts every single week. They know that they know that the submaximal lifts or the submaximal training and hitting those rep PRs is going to tell them, hey, I know that I can do this now because I did this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's interesting to see. Like, I find it, like with Ed Cohen, like, again, he was pretty big on writing his numbers out before training, and he didn't hit those numbers. He was confident in, if he hit those numbers, then he knew that he was going to hit something big in the meet, and he never really went to PRs or anything. So I think that's just a big thing to say. And we want to look like we lift. If you're hitting singles all the time, then you're not really getting the most. That's not hypertrophic in any form or fashion. You're not going to get bigger from that. And Caleb probably agrees with me. We like to look like we lift.
Yeah. I personally, I'm so horrible at judging RPE. I always overshoot. So I like the Ed Cohen style where you have not necessarily just a specific weight, but a weight range that you want to hit, just to kind of keep my reps reserved, like keep a lot of reps in reserve, not overshoot, get that perfect technique, get a lot of volume in with that weight, and just kind of build up over time. If I go based on a RPE system, I end up overshooting, and then I'm not able to do as much volume as I could because I went too intense, and end up overtraining or anything like that. So
I think for someone like you, Caleb, that works for you, and you've been seeing results. So maybe the RPE doesn't work for everybody because you end up overshooting. So when you end up using that RIR and you have that percentage or weight range, and you make it to somewhere in that range, before you walk into the gym, you tell yourself, hey, I'm only going to squat between like 400 and 430 today, and 430 is your cap. And you might be able to do 450 for reps, but when you go in and tell yourself, I'm not going to go above this weight because it could be detrimental to my training, I think that can be very beneficial, and it's proven that way for you, Caleb.
And another thing is I feel like my fatigue is more consistent. My fatigue doesn't really fluctuate crazy day by day as much as it used to when I trained more RPE. So like maybe I come in and hit a 3x3 at RPE, just as an example, and I overshoot, and it's all the last set's a 10, barely got it. My next squat session in the week is going to suffer tremendously. If I have a weight range that I'm saying I'm gonna hit 455 for 3x3, or something, just giving an example. If I stay in that rep range, I got really good reps in, and my next squat session won't suffer because of it. The training plan won't suffer because I overshot in one day of the week if I give myself a range to go by.
I agree with that. I think that's a good way to do it. Go ahead, Dillan.
I think that's really important too. That's where my bias is to using a mixture of percentages in RP training, but sometimes it's just good to identify to yourself you cannot be that objective with your training. Some people just absolutely don't have the ability to look at their training that objectively. Especially, I know Caleb, coming from a football background, I mean, Seth knows this too. It was all or nothing all the time. You never were really taught how to, manage fatigue or, understand the signals your body was telling you. It was just suck it up, keep running, keep playing. And, sometimes that gets so ingrained into you that some lifters just really can't, or, some are just bad at judging it. You have some lifters that have a real weird taper off when they get up to certain intensities. They may be able to, do a 3-rep max with 95%, but in all reality, that 95%, they can't go 5 pounds more.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it, like you said, it's all or nothing. And I think it is good to have those ranges in there so you can decide, hey, if it's feeling good, then yeah, go for it. If it's not feeling good, then I'm going to go to that lower range. And Dylan, like you said yesterday with Dr. Pat Davison, there's a time to be smart about training, but then there's also a time to kind of put that away and just say, okay, I'm just here to lift some weights now. I'm here to train my ass off, so that's what I'm going to do. Instead of just going with that constant, like, well, this might be an RP of a 7.576, so I better not go above that, or I might not be able to train for the rest of the week. Just put your head down and fucking do it.
Yep.
This is one thing I think y'all have all heard me talk about, too. While I do agree that there's a time and a place to stick your head down and really just train hard, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive either. I don't think you can't be intelligent about your training and also not train hard. Just because you're keeping fatigue in mind doesn't mean you're a wuss.
Right. And
I wish we could find that Pat Davidson quote, though. That one's a really good one.
That was really good. To me, working hard in a powerlifting sense is doing everything you can to execute the plan that's given to you that day. If it just so happens that you're a little fatigued or whatever, and you can't quite do it to your standards for that day, it's fine. But at least you're striving, you're eating correctly, you're drinking enough water, you're sleeping well, you're doing recovery tricks and things like that, and managing your fatigue in the gym to put yourself in a position to carry out the task that you have that day. And that to me is working hard, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I like that. I think another marketing tool for coaches nowadays is intensity, or just a marketing tool for any kind of fitness platform. They sell intensity. Like, don't be the lazy person on the couch. Get up and do your thing. Like David Goggins, big intensity guy, and then people soak it up. They're like, yeah, that's motivation for them. I think that's a big thing for nowadays. When training isn't really that it doesn't, not all the time. It's just not that go balls to the wall every single time. We said,
said I was desirable. Sometimes desirable is that people don't want to train, but
Yeah.
that's where the people like David Goggins come in.
Yeah, but again, I don't think for the longevity part of the sport, if you do that every single day, you probably won't be in the sport for that long because you'll literally tear your body down.
I think a lot of people associate powerlifting or anything with like what Ronnie Coleman or bodybuilding even what Ronnie Coleman used to do, where he would hit 800-pound squats 4 or 5 weeks out from the Olympia, and he would just go hard every day in and day out, and he tore his body to pieces. And now everybody has that perception of powerlifting or lifting weights is bad for your joints, and nobody lifts past 50, and you're just basically destroying yourself, when that's not the case. When we have intelligent coaches and that periodize our training in a way that allows us to have longevity. I just thought I'd put that in there.
Dude, yeah. Like Ronnie Coleman, Branch Warren. Dwayne Yates is a big one nowadays. His, what is it? What's it called? Man. His high intensity training, his heavy duty training, or whatever you want to call it. One set to all out failure where you give everything you've got. That's it. And they're selling that intensity because that's attractive to people. Intensity is attractive because it makes you think like, oh, that's what I want to be like. I want to be like that guy. I want to be as big and as strong. And if I want to get that way, I have to train like that every single day. Now, again, you do have to train hard, and you do have to train like a maniac sometimes. But like Dillan says, you have to be smart about it. You can't do that every single time.
I think another piece to longevity of training, and we preach this on the show, is technique over numbers. Making sure you have that technique down before you continue to increase weight. If you get to that point where you have the weight where your technique starts to break down too much and your form compromises and you're risking injury, then it's time to take a step back and be objective, like Dillan says, and say, hey, I can't do this weight perfectly, so I'm going to stop, back down a little bit, and work on form. And, working on form with lower weight than you'd like is not fun. Everybody wants to lift big weight, but the goal is to lift big weight perfectly for a long time.
Couldn't have said it any better.
So, when y'all are getting ready for a meet or getting a training plan together, how do you start that plan? Like Dillan, you're coaching Seth. When Seth came to you, how did you start that plan? What were some questions that you asked him for beginning his powerlifting journey with you?
So, are we talking in the scope of like just from February up until this meet, most recent meet, or when he was fresh to the team?
So when he came to you for coaching for this meet, what did you do with him? How did y'all get the plan going? What kind of plan did you get? How did y'all figure out what he needed?
So it worked out pretty well. I already had a lot of answers, or a lot of answers to questions, because I worked with Seth for 2 other meets as well. But one thing we really identified was he doesn't have the most favorable leverages for squatting, and he's a very, very long individual.
6'3",
and at 6'3", that's a hard life right there for squatting, and
deadlifting.
But no,
and
you're all right with deadlifting
and benching, everything.
I just hear excuses.
But the big thing we looked with Seth was, with him being an equipped lifter, he'd already spent some time in a suit, but we knew he had the tendency to let his hips shoot up whenever he squatted in the suit and also in the deadlift. And then as far as the bench press goes, he had just gotten a brand new bench shirt. So we knew we needed to spend a little bit more time in that shirt. So I think it was about 12 weeks out is when we really started looking at it. And for an equipped lifter, usually I'll progress them. You'll start off about 12 weeks out in knee wraps, and about 10 to 8 weeks out, you'll be in just your suit bottoms, and then you'll get a deload in the middle there about 5 or 6 weeks, and then we'll go full suit. That also includes for the deadlift. And with the equipped lifting, you're lifting at such a high intensity all the time that you absolutely can't take a whole lot of frequency. Just because the equipment doesn't allow you to lift at a very, what I would consider a moderate pace. Like you can't hit a lot of RPE 7s and a lot of RPE 8s because the suit is making you lift with 110% of your raw max. So the big thing is we go through progressions as far as making sure you stay under a certain RPE threshold while still getting a lot of good practice in that suit and the bench shirt. So it's a lot of sets of like 3s, a lot of sets of 2s, but stopping, 2-3 reps short of failure. With the equipment, it kind of makes it hard to hit depth sometimes. That's a different factor you got to go in, but you really the way I do it is I looked at the entire layout and what are some exercises we can work on in between to help with his problems. So on his first day, he was doing squats in the suit, and because of how he's built, I kind of took the assumption that he's probably weaker in his hips. He's not bracing very well, not externally rotating at his hips super well. So you add in things like Bulgarian split squats, which forces him to externally rotate at the hip and really load into the hip and the glutes. And then on his fourth day, he had 3-0 tempo squats. So it really mimicked the same pattern that you would in a very tight suit. It takes a little bit to go down, but as soon as you hit depth, you want to explode out. And that would allow him to really fill out where his body was in 3D space and really think about it so he could work on that positioning. Same with the deadlift. We implemented pause deadlifts because every time he pulled in our last training block, hips would shoot immediately up. As soon as he broke the ground, hips would immediately shoot up. So we just had him pause and hang out in that position at a pretty sub-maximal weight, just to really feel like this is what a good rep feels like. Because unless you're videoing and that doesn't always do the best, you really have to feel what a good rep feels like. Sometimes you can lift and you can do something 100 times and not really know that that's right because you just don't know the feel of it. And then the bench press, that's a whole different ordeal. You usually progress down with blocks, and on his off days, we just focus on maintaining raw chest strength and raw tricep strength because shirt doesn't beat you up quite as bad as the suit and the deadlift and the squat suit, but it still kind of irritates your skin and can load your chest a little too much.
So y'all are doing 4 days a week, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to manage fatigue, you really can't do much more than that. It's just, especially with the equipment, it's really aggressive. It tears your skin up. To get in your squat suit, if I had to get in my squat suit more than 2 days or more than a day a week, I'd probably cry.
Wow.
I mean, I still have permanent scars on my thighs from mine. Like the material bites you.
Man. So Caleb, what about? I know you're working with Juggernaut, and it lets you pick. Lets you pick your what kind of exercises you want to do. So, what are some exercises, or what do you pick for your program, and how do you figure out what exercises you're going to do for that block, or that training cycle?
So, to start off, I feel like the logic of Juggernaut kind of has a similar logic to what Dillan was saying for Seth, picking exercises that allow you to get in a certain threshold of work without having to beat yourself up. It's not to the extent of equipped lifting because of the fact that you're lifting with super maximal weight, 110% often. So he had to find ways to mimic that patterning or fix some muscular weakness or some patterning weakness without having to get in that equipment as often. For me, in an off season, I kind of go about that the same way as well. I'll take a break from low bar squatting, or I'll take a break from heavy conventional deadlifting or so on and so forth, and replace them with variations like pause deadlifts, deficit deadlifts, high bar squats, front squats, even hack squats, different bench variations like pin press, off the close grip bench, wide grip bench, stuff like that. Kind of starts with a really high volume. Coming from a more bodybuilding background, I guess you could say, call me a bodybuilder if you want to. I am really good at handling high volumes, but high intensity too often beats me up. So I like to start out building a muscular base long in off season and gradually linear. Juggernaut's very strict block periodization, but it's linearly digressing the reps over the blocks. And eventually, about 8 weeks out, I will start being more and more specific, adding in 1 to 2 low bar squat days as much as I can handle, like 3 to 4, not really 4, but 3 bench days, one heavy deadlift day, and like a technique kind of deadlift day. Getting more and more specific as it goes on, throwing in more singles, sport specific stuff. But like we talked about earlier, doing the singles all year round, like Joey Flex's lifters, really doesn't work as well for me. I'd say my limit is about 8 to 10 weeks of doing singles straight. And after that, I'll just be beat up so bad that I'll start digressing in strength. So that's basically how my programming goes.
Have you ever thought about working with like Josh Bryan or somebody like that?
I actually have, or anybody that does kind of like, well, Josh Bryant does a mixture of a lot of things with high volume and high intensity stuff. But Juggernaut fits my lifestyle currently because I am a broke college student and it's not very expensive and I'm making good progress on it. So this is kind of the filler between when I have the availability to hire a coach like that. As soon as that becomes an option, that is 100% what I'm going to do. Still looking to see what kind of options or what kind of coach would be best for me. Like I said earlier, I'm not great with RPE training. So somebody like Joey Flex might not be the best fit for me, but who knows? But that's something I'm going to have to consider down the road.
So, Seth, Dillan was just talking about your training, your programming, and how he programmed for you. So what are some things you learned from this training cycle and the meet that you want to take into your next, for you getting ready for nationals?
I think since I got hurt in March or whenever it was, the purpose to focus on technique became so much more important because the reason I got hurt was because my technique was flawed. So, you know, we say it all the time on the show, but technique is my biggest focus right now. I'm still in that forever process of perfecting the movements. So I'm always looking at the little things in the lifts that I can work on during that lift, like during the main lift, squat, bench, and deadlift, but also, like Dylan was talking about, what supplemental exercises we can add in to help strengthen those movements. So like right now I have weak hips, and my hips come up during the squat and deadlift. So obviously I need to strengthen my hips. So doing things like that, hip airplanes, hip mobility, and then really during these next off season, I'm really going to focus on, again, building that technique and doing accessories that work on my weaknesses and my weak points. And then I'd say the third part is just maintaining that gap between getting the right amount of intensity and keeping fatigue low so that you don't overtrain. Because I think it's a very fine line between the two. And I think this block, he did really well with planning out the RPEs and the sets and the reps to where I didn't go over that fatigue threshold. So we're just going to continue that through this off season, and I'm going to try to make sure that I'm getting sufficient work and getting the right amount of intensity out of my raw training. Albeit raw training is not my favorite, but you got to do it to get better at the equipment. So keeping the intensity high enough, but also keeping the fatigue low enough to where, like Caleb said, I don't start to regress after a short period of time.
You mentioned overtraining, and do you think there's a fine line? I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one. I think if you're eating and sleeping, I think if you're eating and sleeping right, I think it can get pretty hard to overtrain. I really do, and I think that's just my opinion. I see Caleb smiling over here, so I'll see what he thinks. But I do think if you're eating, sleeping, and have your programming and training under control, then I think it can get pretty difficult to overtrain, and I think I just think it get hard to overtrain.
Run Juggernaut for about 8 weeks and see how you feel.
Well, that's the thing that, like you said, 8 weeks though. That's a pretty good chunk of time.
That is a pretty good chunk of time. Yeah. Hey, one deload included.
Well, I think to see the effects of overtraining are not immediate. In my opinion, if you were going to see if you were overtraining, it would be over the course of a few weeks. So, you notice, over maybe a week that you're more fatigued than you usually are. And I think it's how you respond to that. So continuing to do what you do and still feeling the same high level of fatigue, I think that's how you overtrain. I kind of see what you're saying, as in, like, in the moment during the training session, it's hard to do too much. But it is like a longer term thing that you see. What do you think, Dillan?
I do in a sense agree with what Altman says, that eating and sleeping well does influence overall fatigue, but I do disagree with that it's hard to overtrain, just because in our sport, we do have weight classes. If you're eating like an animal all the time and you're sleeping 10 hours a day, yeah, your training is going to be really great, but there are a few other things too that go along with that. Your training's not in this vacuum. You can overtrain based on your life stresses. You get, kind of like for the team, Altman's got all of our guys deloading because it's finals week, and something you're typically capable of doing, with your normal sleeping and eating regimen, you may not be able to do because your stress is high. But I also think, fatigue is kind of viewed as this evil monster, but in all reality, like, if you are training hard enough, you are going to accumulate fatigue. And fatigue and the key word there is accumulate, because, you really are doing a tactful overreaching when you're progressively overloading. So you are, by definition, going to accumulate fatigue that's going to have to be dissipated in some way. So, no matter how much you sleep, no matter how much you eat, the goal is still somewhat to accumulate fatigue. I mean, it's definitely a byproduct of, training and trying to make gains, but I don't necessarily think that it can be avoided. You can manage it, and definitely sleeping and eating a lot helps a good bit to keep that down, but eventually you're going to reach that threshold. Now, if you eat well, sleep well, and keep your life stresses down, that helps a lot. You could stretch a 3-week training block out to a 5-week training block, but it's real important to remember that's not in a vacuum. And, some people can't necessarily eat in the volume that it takes to to maintain a good training cycle too. There are other health factors that go into that. This is kind of an extreme example, but if you have an athlete that's a diabetic, they physically are not supposed to eat, what we would consider a good day of eating before going to train. And two, if you eat too much and you're constantly going up and you're not focusing on eating quality foods too, you could push yourself out of your weight class and potentially compromise your health, And I know you didn't necessarily mean eat everything you see in sight, Altman, but since this podcast is for younger lifters, that's a real good thing to note is, when we say eat well, we do mean in large volume, but also eating very nutritious foods,
Nutrient dense,
you can eat a lot of Pop-Tarts, but that's not going to long-term health. That's not really going to help you very much.
I agree. I definitely agree.
You can't live for a long time if you don't live for a long time.
That's pretty good.
I mean, it's
so Altman. Let me ask you. Or finish out, Dylan.
But yeah, I mean that with fatigue, I don't think it's too many times it gets talked about. Like I've got to manage fatigue, but I don't think most of the time people have to take a step back and realize like fatigue is going to come regardless. If you're training and you're pushing to add weight to the bar as a power lifter or to add size as a bodybuilder or any type of, strength discipline, you're purposely pushing the bill. And it's going to come with some type of trade-off in fatigue.
I'd say it's necessary to have that overreaching in a sense.
I'd agree. Yeah. So I definitely agree. You definitely need that overreaching, and it's planned. That's the difference between overtraining and overreaching, though. Overreaching's planned overtraining in a sense. You plan to do that, so you have it. Then the next week or 2 weeks, you have that recovery period that you can kind of super compensate. But what were you going to ask, Seth?
So, Alvin, let me ask you. I know you recently switched to like a bodybuilding workouts because you're going to do a show here soon, and I know your eating is very in check, and you focus on your sleep. So, like you said, eating and sleeping is very important. And I know you switched to like a extremely high volume training, right?
Yeah, but recently I have switched back to the powerlifting style of training now. It's more strength training. So I did do the bodybuilding. I did do the bodybuilding for a while, though. Yes.
So did you make that statement because you noticed that in your personal training that you weren't accumulating a whole lot of fatigue and you were still pushing hard?
Yes, that's exactly it. Maybe it's because I'm not training hard enough, but I think I train pretty hard sometimes. I think I train pretty hard most of the time. But yeah, I just found that if I sleep like 6 to 8 hours a night at least, and then eat the 4 to 6 times a day, maybe not always 6 times a day, then I just find that my body recovers really well from that. And kind of like what Caleb said, it was more submaximal training. I'm not hitting these massive numbers. I was doing like somewhere in like I might go 10 to 20 reps on a set. So it's not the heaviest weight in the world, but I'm just accumulating a lot of volume, and I was finding like I could recover really well from that. I was getting stronger every time I would go in there to hit that next body part for the next time, it was stronger. I could hit more weight. And I don't know if it was a mental thing, if I was actually recovered, but I just found that it worked really well for me. And I just find that if to know that I'm recovered, I just look at my numbers. Are my numbers going up? If they're going up, then I know I'm recovering. If they're going to start to go down for the next week or 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, I need to back off a little bit. I need to kind of take a deload.
Okay. I can understand that. I can understand that because I'm the same way. I respond well to volume, and volume doesn't, fatigue me overall as much as intensity does. So I guess I could see how. And that's why powerlifting and bodybuilding can be two distinct different things, because you just cannot tolerate the same volume with, one, the power lifts, and two, the intensity that you have to do to drive strength gain. And so it's so much easier, in my opinion, to overtrain as a power lifter than it would be as a bodybuilder.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have noticed that switching back over, that definitely doing the higher intensity does take a little bit longer to recover. And I have had to switch my training around a little bit. Like I had these high intensity interval training days, so like my active recovery days. And on those days, I was trying to focus more on mainly just concentric movements because that causes the least amount of damage. But I was doing farmers on those days too, and I have been noticing that my recovery has been a little bit slower. I'm able to recover, but I'm not able to recover as fast as I want to. So I am going to end up taking those farmers and putting them on an actual lifting day instead of the recovery days. So I think that comes down to the higher intensity stuff. It's just a lot of load on the body, a lot of eccentric forces when you walk with 200, 300, 400 pounds. So yeah, go ahead.
I've got kind of an abstract question for all of y'all, and anybody can pick this up. But you were talking about you doing that in the rep range of 10 to 20 reps, and you were getting stronger every week. This is something I think about a lot. So
yeah.
Would y'all beg the question that, when you improve like in that 8 to 12 rep range, do y'all ever consider that maybe it's multifactorial? Like you can say, yes, I'm getting stronger, but because me personally, I think there's that potential there that maybe you're not necessarily getting stronger per se, in the sense of powerlifting, moving that 1 rep max, that's the key here is moving that 1 rep max for your squat, bench, and deadlift. But that maybe you're getting either A, better at that movement, or B, building work capacity, or maybe not necessarily pushing that 1 rep strength.
100%. Go ahead, Caleb.
I feel like the work capacity thing is hit the nail on the head. To me, when you get stronger in that 10 to 20 rep range or 8 to 20 rep range, whatever you want to call it, you could say that you are getting stronger per se. Watching your progress go up on lifts is a good way to indicate, if you're actually performing progressive overload correctly, and in turn gaining muscle. For a powerlifting sense, I feel like those 8 to 12 rep range kind of builds your work capacity up, and it builds your volume tolerance up very, very well. It's not specific enough to a 1 rep max to say that it makes you stronger, in quote unquote. If you're not in a distinct meet prep where you have a meet in the next, say, 15, 16 weeks or so, it could be a good idea to incorporate some kind of higher volume training. But past that point, it could be almost detrimental. I've heard Chad Wesley Smith say that the purpose of a hypertrophy block in powerlifting is not to increase your 1 rep max, it's to increase your work capacity and develop muscle tissue to set you up to be able to lift bigger weights in the future, which in turn make you stronger. So it's not a direct correlation, but it helps, in my opinion. But different things work for different people, and not everybody responds very well to that rep range for strength. A lot of people do better with either, say, 5s or 4s, or 4 to 6. Still good amount of volume, still able to build good muscle tissue in that range, but some people can't recover from that higher volumes. So it's just to each their own, in my opinion.
So you're saying like that. So when you're doing the hypertrophy phase, your volume goes up, but your strength is going to go down. But then when you do the actual powerlifting, your strength is going to go up. Your overall size might go down in your volume, but then you won't be as big because eventually you're peaking. Your body's probably not going to maintain that amount of size. But then when you start doing the hypertrophy stuff again, you go back up, and then you get the strength to go back up a little bit above that. A continuous stepping stones.
Yeah, it's stepping stone. It's not a linear progression. If that makes sense.
That brings me to my next good question. Because from what I've read on Chad Wesley Smith stuff, I've ran the Jug AI myself. I didn't have near the same results as Caleb over here has, but would y'all agree that there is a point when you run a hyper block that you do have, in the scope of powerlifting, a point of diminishing returns? Like, I would think there's a certain line that your GPP can be really high and you can be very well off, but maybe in the scope of powerlifting, it doesn't need to be that high for the time being, and you should be focusing on strength in that time period. Because I agree, having that solid basis and that muscle tissue is definitely important, but you've seen some people take it to the extreme and run hyper work for 3-4 months at a time before they go back to their strength work. And personally speaking, I just think at some point that I think you get a certain line in the sand where maybe having that level of general preparedness isn't necessarily useful in the scope of powerlifting, to that high level. Some people just enjoy it and are freaks like Altman, but,
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, I think that's kind of why, or the reason that a powerlifting block in preparation for a meet is built the way it is that the hyper block is put at the very beginning. So as you go through the preparation to a meet, obviously at the meet, you're only going to be doing singles. So that's the highest point of specificity in your training. So as you go through from the hyper block on, the weight's going to go up and the reps are going to decrease. So like, as I noticed that, when I got to the last week or two of training before this meet, that, all I've been doing is I haven't done a set of more than 4 or 5 on any of the compound movements, in at least 6 weeks. So I noticed that, if you told me to do a set of 8 on squat, I'd probably die. Because my work capacity went down, although my strength going toward, the singles and the doubles went up. The work capacity did go down because I hadn't worked out in so long. So I do agree with that there's a point in time in powerlifting specific training to have that hyper block. Like Caleb said, be building the muscle fibers and increasing strength in that facet. But then as you go through, pulling those reps down to get more specific.
But yes, to everybody's point, you're all correct. I do think there's a point of diminishing returns if you focus too much on hypertrophy, like you said, because obviously powerlifting has a sport-specific skill to it of a 1-rep max. The closer you are to a 1-rep max, the better you are going to be at it. That's just how things work. The closer you are in weight to a 1-rep max, and the lower reps you are, the more control you have to have under a certain weight, so it's more specific. Yeah, there you go.
Dillan?
So, one of the ways I would frame it up too is, what do y'all think are some good ways to kind of tackle that problem? Because that's one of the things. That's one of the problems I have with block periodization as a whole. It's definitely usually the go-to training style, but why do you think we're so quick to accept that? Oh, I'm doing a hyper block, I'm getting overall weaker. Like relative to my 1-rep max, because I do understand you're going to have some deviation because of, the specificity aspect isn't there. But, it's not uncommon to hear people like, oh yeah, I'm about 30 pounds off my 1-rep max. And, I think that's just a big limitation and, definitely an issue with block periodization that I don't think that should be accepted as nearly as commonplace.
Well, here's my take on it. If you are able to handle a higher threshold of volume over a long period of time, let's just say you're handling super high volume in a hyper block, you go to a strength block, and all of a sudden your sets of 5 do not feel near as hard as those sets of 8, 10, or whatever. all of a sudden you're able to handle more total volume in that strength rep range, and therefore getting more practice in that rep range, therefore improving strength.
I see where both y'all are coming from. Like Dillan just mentioned, what are some ways to do that, and Caleb, you just mentioned like it increases your overall work capacity or volume, so you can handle that volume in the end. You can handle that.
Also, as using hypertrophy block as a recovery tactic is helpful too, because, like we said, having a sustainable approach to powerlifting doesn't mean doing a 1 rep max year round.
Yeah.
A hypertrophy block is a good alternative for somebody who wants to, stay away from that heavy training or gotten really beat up from a meet prep, going super balls to the wall heavy, and it kills two birds with one stone, building that muscle and building up that work capacity and giving your body in certain areas the chance to recover. For me, my hips and low back get super beat up and my shoulders get beat up from a meet prep. And when I'm in a hypertrophy block doing variations that kind of avoid fatiguing those areas as much, I feel like I'm better recovered as a whole and I can handle more volume, therefore transferring over in the long term to my strength.
I kind of like the so when I first got into lifting, I was pretty big into the conjugate stuff, and I think that's a good good lifting style for athletes. Maximal strength, and you're still getting a little bit of that muscle building capacity because they do the 3 to 5 sets of 8 to 12 for their accessory work, and they have accessories in there, and that's kind of carried over into my training and how I like the program for people also. So kind of I like that power building kind of split. It might take a little bit longer for you to get stronger and bigger, but I think it does add in the end, give you that longevity aspect for the sport. And I think I like strongman training too, because you get that maximal training and you get that time under tension training. So you're doing the best of both worlds in that sport. Now, of course, you don't get as strong as a powerlifter because you're not being as specific as a powerlifter, and you don't get as muscular as a bodybuilder because you're not being as muscular, because it's not your style of training. But you still do develop strength and hypertrophy. So I think that can be helpful to use for powerlifters also, instead of just doing a straight hypertrophy block, doing more of a power building style, and keep the main compound movements, keep those relatively light, pretty sub-maximal, but then do more focus on your hypertrophy stuff while just trying to maintain that strength.
Mm-hmm. You see a lot of strong men come back from, you're talking about strongmen, you'll see a lot of them guys come off from show prep or peaking for one of their competitions. They'll come back and do powerlifting, and all of a sudden they haven't lifted, they haven't done the power lift in a little long while, and all of a sudden they touch them after about 10 weeks of training, and they're at over what they used to do, and they've used strongman as a means to build up their muscle and work capacity in the off season, if they're powerlifting off season, if you want to say. You see that happen all the time. There's just something to think about too.
Yeah, I think they're pretty good training styles, and like you said, just for powerlifters too. It's in order to build up your work capacity, and in order to build up that I think they both have really good carryover. Also, I mean, a strong powerlifter is usually going to do decent in strongman. They're not going to be horrible, but they're not going to be the best, of course, because they're not specific for that. But they're still going to be pretty good because strength does carry over. So I think that can be used to benefit each other.
Mm-hmm.
But alrighty.
I want to talk about one more thing before we close out. So while we were competing this weekend, old Austin Perkins also competed. I don't know if you guys saw his Instagram post, but the guy at 21 years old and 160 pounds, I think, he squatted 300 kilos, so 661, benched 397, and deadlifted 320, which is 705. And I think that is absolutely insane. I think I saw somewhere on Instagram that he's like the number 5 guy to total 11 times body weight.
That's insane. He is equipped though, but still, those are impressive numbers.
No, that was raw. That was raw.
Those were raw.
These are raw.
That was raw.
Oh,
raw
I'm
numbers.
sorry if Austin's listening to this. My apologies, man. My apologies. That is awesome, man. Good for you. Good Lord.
That is
How dare you downplay his
Yeah,
raw
how dare I
strength.
downplay Austin?
Yeah,
Man, that is impressive. Props to you, brother.
that's next level stuff.
Yeah.
That's insane.
He's a freak, man, and he's always had that drive. He's been posting up where he went on King of the Lifts a while back with Atwood, Pug, and Michael CA, and where he said he'd hit this 800 kg total within a year, and lo and behold, about a year later, here he is doing it, and he really is. I mean, once he sets his mind to something, he's got one of the strongest wills, especially when it comes to powerlifting. You know, even if he lets his tongue go and says something that may be an overreach, he's going to make it happen. And it's just ridiculous on what that kid can and will do in this sport. I mean, even at 21,
as long as you can back up what you're saying, then hey, go for it. I mean, I can just tell by the way like what he posts on Instagram how passionate he is about what he does, and it's very admirable.
I mean, he's 72 kg most of the time, like, and I'm sure he was eating up into weigh-ins. Like he doesn't walk around above 74 kg.
Yes.
So like he can eat into meats, he can gain weight. I can only imagine how crazy it'll be in another 5 or 6 years once he puts on those, finally puts on those 3 kgs of muscle mass, and just it's going to be silly what he can do.
And he even told us on the show when he came on that he doesn't focus on eating. And so imagine what he could do if he took nutrition, put it down to a science and started eating what he needed to.
Mm-hmm. That's what you call a gifted athlete right there.
Yeah.
He was just meant to do this. I mean, it's been a long time coming for him, though. I mean, he's powerlifted for, ever since I think he said, 7th, 8th grade?
Yeah.
And he's definitely had his times where he's been hitting the mouth, powerlifting, just not being that, that guy. And, you got to give it to him just to have that perseverance to go, it may not be my day right now, but I'm going to stick my head down and keep doing work until it is my day. And I'm going to make it happen. And when it is my day, I'm not coming down from it.
Damn right.
Well, fellas, it's been a fantastic episode. We dove pretty deep into training and different styles of training, and what fatigue can do, and fatigue recovery, and different hypertrophy stuff. But I think we're going to close it out right here. Altman, Dillan, Caleb, thank you guys for coming on. Thank you for your time. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah,
thank you for having us.
Where can they find y'all on Instagram, Dillan and Caleb, or any other thing y'all want to plug?
My Instagram is caleb.meyer with 2 R's on the end, and my lifting page is thick.bros.
Go and check that out for some heavy lifts. Dillan?
So I don't really post a lot on my Instagram, but it's D_BER09. So that's really where you can find me at. I post occasionally, but it's usually around meet time. I've been trying to make myself post more, but I just don't. Me and social media don't get along. I try to repost y'all's podcasts all the time, and I get about 10 minutes into it, can't figure it out, and
we appreciate the effort, Dylan. We really do.
So.
Appreciate the effort.
Yeah, thank you.
Y'all go check those guys out. DM them for advice.
There you go. As always, you can find us at triple.b.podcast. Check me out at Seth.Todd76. Alden, go and plug it.
Big strength.
There it is. All right, everybody. Thank you guys for listening, and have a great week.